All right, let's have a word of prayer. God, thank you for all of these people that are participating in this conversation. And as we share our experiences and the things that we have learned from them with each other, we pray that you would help us to hear each other, to share, and that you would be present in this conversation, and that you would bless the ministries that we are all a part of, and the people that we work with, and the people that we are reaching out to. Amen.
So, at the risk of saying, some of the things that we're going to talk about are probably stuff that you already know about and may very well be much in the middle of. So part of my hope is that this would just be kind of a collaborative conversation where we're sharing some wisdom. But one of the reasons we wanted to start with this particular topic on developing community partnerships, and we'll explain why the other tagline is "when all you have is a peanut butter sandwich," is that when the commission started contacting churches to follow up on areas where congregations had identified specific ministry passions, one of the things we heard over and over again was the challenge that churches, and it's not just small churches, there's a local church, large church, that's facing some of the same things, that they may have lots of people, but finding people who have a passion and energy and willingness to engage can still sometimes be a challenge. And so what do you do with that? There's a mission, there's a few people that have a passion for it, but it maybe not something that it seems like there's enough people or enough resources to be able to kind of follow through on that. So we wanted to explore that topic a little bit more and offer some space where we could share some of the ways that a few of our ABC communities have engaged that and are leaning into that by partnering and networking and just kind of deliberately engaging with and coming alongside folks wherever we meet partners in the mission, whether they're from other congregations, whether they're from the community, whether they're members that are mostly disengaged from the church but have a passion for this. So we want to kind of gather around that and to offer just a bit of anchoring before we get into some of the storytelling and invite your stories. It really, for me, centers around two stories or springs from two stories that we all know. And the first is the story of the loaves and fishes. You know it as well as I do. Jesus was teaching all day. The people are hungry. And Jesus goes and tells the disciples to do something about it, which is crazy. There's not enough stores around to buy that much food. They wouldn't have had enough money, even if there was a place to buy it. And really, shouldn't Jesus have known and thought of all of that before? But again, how the story unfolds, all they have is 5 loaves and 2 little fish. And John's gospel adds the detail that they came from the lunch of a small boy. Apparently the one kid whose mom must have been planning ahead for him. And what follows after that is that not only does everybody have enough to eat, but that there's more left over than what they started with. And as I reflect on that story, what it speaks to me, some touchstones that I think are kind of critical for this conversation is that the task was bigger than what the disciples were capable of handling on their own. There was no logical way that they would be able to solve this need. The second piece is that the resources came from among those who were gathered, not from the disciples. And which is, again, when we think about ministry, there's always this temptation to be self-sufficient in it. And that's not necessarily always the paradigm that we find in the Gospels, the encounters that Jesus had as he was working with the disciples. In fact, it came from the fringe, not just those in the crowd who might be well-to-do or that one would think would have the resources, but at least in John's Gospel, as it tells us, is a small child. But of course, with God's calling and blessing, and as it's shared, there's not only enough, but more than they could have expected. In fact, more than they started with, which, again, we might say, well, that's just a miraculous detail, but I think it points us to a reality or a truth about the way the kingdom of God works. And I know the temptation is, it's a miracle story, it's an idealistic story, maybe it's for then, but is it really for now? Those of it, and I'm sure you all have stories where when we're engaged in the mission, we have encounters like this that bear witness to, modern miracles of God's work. So that's the first story. Second story, and I think it's important to me uh, as I look at this, that Mark and Luke put these stories very closely together, is Jesus sending out the disciples to proclaim the kingdom of God. And I know you read this story too, where Jesus sends them out. He gives them authority and power, not just to speak the good news, but to demonstrate it through acts of healing and freeing people from bondage, spiritual oppression. But I have to say, and this is, some of y'all have been on the New Church, New Century journey or have familiar with that. One of the things that rocked my world in that about 17, 18 years ago now was when I realized that Jesus had sent the disciples out on the mission with authority and power before they really understood who he was. And what rocked my world about that was the realization that so often we think of discipleship as a process or a class that you take and you graduate from, and now you're a disciple, now you're trained enough, now we can do the mission, when really Jesus models mission as a place to do discipleship instead of the other way around. You get discipled, then you go do the mission. And what really happens is we get addicted to the discipling part of it and we never get around to the mission, or we go get so busy doing the mission that we forget to disciple others and create space in there in the midst of that. So Jesus uses the very act of engaging in mission as training in discipleship and coming to understand firsthand, personally, experientially, who Jesus is, what the kingdom of God's about. It generates questions that drive them to ask, what's going on here? Hey, you told this story. What does that mean? Those sorts of things. And the implication being that it is not discipleship or mission. It's how we start with people who have a passion and a commitment, and how do we do discipleship in the midst of it. So with that in mind, the last thing that I'm going to say before kind of transitioning over to the next piece is really foundationally this idea that God is already moving in the world, that we're not carrying the gospel in at least one sense where God has never been, that God is there, God's working in people's lives. There are points of contact, and part of what we're called to do is simply to name it and together to work to call it out, make it visible, to enact it, to live it out. And will we have the hearts and eyes and the passion to see it, to perceive it, to engage in it, to desire it, and to beckon others into it? So mission isn't so much, at least in my mind, about what we can do unto others as what God is calling us to do in helping name that and bring it to light, what we can do alongside others, how we can help people name in their lives what God may be doing that they may not have words for, they may not understand what that's all about. And always asking the question, who else can we get involved? How do we actively open the doors for someone else to engage in the mission? And out of that are the commission, when we're talking about community partnerships, so now moving into some of the practical piece of that, it really could be very broadly defined. Obviously, depending on our ministry context, our own theological convictions, we can narrow that down. But community partnerships, anything that makes life better for people outside. They can be partnerships with other church people. They can be partnerships with people who would not claim any particular faith, whether that's a secular organization or those who are, have no particular faith claim. Community partnerships, another facet is, the importance of building relationships in the process of living out our faith. And another factor in that for us is helping churches in a survival mentality to have a different perspective, that our main objective is to help people live out their relationship with Christ in everyday life. And so rather than worry about the survival piece, which is a reality, right, for so many of us, but it's also, the more we get caught up in that, the more a tightening spiral it becomes. But to look for, where's the life? Where's God working? Where's God put a passion in somebody's heart in the church, and how does that connect with the passion that God's put in the heart of others that we may know through networks, through other partnerships in the community. And to just transition over to that, you know, Gabriel's got a story and Chuck has a story, and after they tell some of their stories about how some of these networks and partnerships have emerged, we want to open that up if others have stories, or and then, you know, move on to, you know, other questions, whether practical, theological, that sort of thing. So with that, I think I'm going to mute myself and ask Gabriel to kind of tell the story, maybe explaining what Stone Soup is, why the peanut butter sandwiches, and what does that have to do with partnerships and community networking.
Okay, so Chuck was trying to join us apparently, and it wasn't working for him. So if I keep looking away, it's because I'm refreshing my email to see if he's trying to get in on this. But Stone Soup started a year and a half ago with, well, the idea hatched a little before that, when my Sunday school class and a few other people started going down to Street Life with Max Ramsey to apprentice with them. We did some volunteering, but the understanding in the group was that we were doing so to learn in order to apply what we were learning in our own context. So someone that went down with us to Street Life had a conversation with David Nelson, who's very involved with Street Life, about, you know, what does it take to start something like this? Thinking you have to start a nonprofit, you have to do paperwork, you have to register. And David said, no, really, we started with a few guys and some peanut butter sandwiches and a pickup truck. And we went out and we found somebody in the community who we invited to. They basically just asked him if he knew of anybody who needed a sandwich and if he would like one as well. And so he knew where people were who were in need, and that was their connection into the community. That's how Street Life started. Last week, they served food to, I think, 260 some people. So the following week, the person that had met with David sat down with some of us and said, so this is all it takes. I'll make peanut butter sandwiches. Who's showing up? So several of us, hello, Chuck. Several of us showed up, and it was January. It was actually the first Saturday in January, I think. And it was bitterly cold. But we went to the local library because we knew someone who was connected with someone in our church who has had a ministry to the homeless for many people. For many years. She lives in a low-income neighborhood and just looks out for people she encounters. And because she's built that relationship, she was our person of peace. So she introduced us at the local library to, I think it was 4 guys that use the library as a daytime warming shelter and are kind of chronically homeless. And that day, nobody ate our peanut butter sandwiches because they get a lot of peanut butter at the shelter. So we ate our peanut butter sandwiches and just sat and listened to them. And one of the things we asked was, okay, if peanut butter is not the thing that you want, what could we bring that would be better? And they were just delighted to be asked. The next week it was ham sandwiches. After that, we started bringing soup as well. And over the last year and a half, it's grown. At least one of those guys still comes regularly and is there when we arrive at the library parking lot, and just is in the trailer unpacking things. We have a trailer now. Is unpacking things and setting up, and just he's one of our people on the ground that gets us up and running every week. But it's grown quite a bit from those 4 guys and a handful of volunteers to roughly 40-ish people eat a meal together. And we don't say that we serve a meal, we share a meal. Roughly 40 people every Saturday gather in the library parking lot and we eat together. When it comes to developing community partnerships, we're a little church. a meal for 40 every week is completely beyond what we could sustain on our own. There's no way we could do that. So we have several partnerships with local feeding ministries and food pantries, and also non-local. There was, for a while, their situation has kind of changed, but for a while we were receiving kind of leftovers from a food pantry in Brookfield area. And that connection is kind of a complicated story, but it was a very good relationship both ways. We gave them volunteer time, and they would share food with us that became kind of the core of some of our meals. We shared our story with the local Sisters of St. Agnes and their associate sisters, who are women who feel a calling to serve in the community, but not necessarily called to be nuns. And so they work with the Sisters of St. Agnes. One of them has been with us almost every week, and one of the sisters was for a long time as well, until health problems kind of got in the way. She's not been able to be with us. Other churches, people from other churches have become a part of this. The volunteer who started it, his parents are Buddhist. And last summer, they came to drop something off and kind of got all into it, and now are regular volunteers. One of the things that I'm involved with is a knitting group that meets at the local yarn shop on Tuesday nights. I've been involved with that for 2 or 3 years, just about every Tuesday night. And we sit around for 2 hours eating cookies and knitting and talking, and just talking about what's going on in life. And so among the things that I talk about when I'm there is stone soup. I tell stone soup stories. Last fall, went to the regular Tuesday knitting group and sat down in the only empty seat. And before I even had my coat off, the woman next to me said, "How do I get involved with this stone soup thing you talk about all the time?" And I said, "Well, you show up on Saturday and you eat." And she's been coming almost every Saturday since. She cooks for us many weeks, and has also, when we were driving to the food pantry in the Brookfield area, sometimes I would ride with her and we would have faith conversations, because she would see some of the things that were happening at Stone Soup, and she would ask questions. The way that people prayed, just like they're talking to God on a phone, just that amazes her. And so she said, "I want to learn how to pray like that." And so discipleship is happening in the midst of that. And the last couple of months, she's been coming to worship on Sunday mornings. Other people in the knitting group have also donated when we need ingredients for things, or they will donate scarves and hats. They said, some of your people are homeless. We knit. We can make something to keep them warm. So, my fellow knitters are collaborative partners in this. We've also, as we have needs, put them out on Facebook, just kind of figuring, well, we'll just put it out to our friends. We had a need in January for some gravy. We were making Thanksgiving dinner, basically. And so we put the need out, and some guy named Nick, who we didn't know at all how we found him, said, "Oh, I can do that. Swing by my house and pick it up." Well, months later, we figured out what the connection was. He was our friend's realtor's husband, who was, for months, we called him Nick the Gravy Guy. We still kind of do, but he and his family have also volunteered and donated other things, and been involved. And there's a guy we really don't know. I have so many questions about him. All I know at this point is that his name is Sid. We call him Sid the Drive-By Eggman. And every week he drives up in a smart car and hands us a carton of hard-boiled eggs. And somehow he knows that we call him Sid the Drive-By Eggman. And so he puts little address labels from Sid the Drive-By Eggman on them. So, all of these partnerships have grown up, some of them through other churches or church relationships, but many of them through secular connections that we have, or friend connections like friend's realtor's husband, that just come from the relationships that we have in normal everyday life, and inviting people into the mission. We try to be prepared every week for the meal. But one of the things that we learned is that, as Brian was sharing the story of Jesus sending out the disciples and saying not to bring anything with them, sometimes if we prepare a little too much, we don't leave room for those miracles to happen. I could have bought several jars of gravy. I could have asked within the church for gravy to be donated, but instead we put it out on Facebook. And because of that, we now have a connection with Nick, the gravy guy, and his family. Just being as prepared as we can be, but leaving room for miracles. Every time we do that, something really cool happens. And those relationships, the circle gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Brian, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, sorry. And, along those stories, I think one of the critical pieces is, again, not just doing things for people, but with.
Yes.
Some of the stories, and I know we can't take time to tell all the
I
stories.
can tell you stone soup stories till 3 a.m. I won't, I promise, but I could.
But some of the really cool things happen when people who we might frame it as are being served,
Yes.
they come and bring food to share.
Yes.
They share some of the ingredients, they share some of the things, they help us set up, they become involved in cooking. One of the guys who was staying at the shelter, had a lot of stuff going on. He cooked soup for us and paid for the ingredients himself.
Mm-hmm.
He made 5 gallons of soup. And so we tell those stories, we celebrate them, because we're reinforcing that this isn't a power thing. This is a creating community thing for us. And so, but in the broader sense of making networks, we're looking for those kind of connections among those that we might say are the mission field, saying if they have a passion for what's going on, if God puts it on our heart to connect, not just the what we're doing, but the why, and that happens, we try to build into that and celebrate in that and keep the doors open to that.
Yes. One of the things that happened a while ago was Ruby's Pantry, which is a food resource locally that allows people to get like $100 worth of groceries for like $20. They had pizza crusts. And so many of the people that are regular guests at Stone Soup received food from Ruby's Pantry and had gotten pizza crusts. And, when you have a stack of 12 pizza crusts and you're maybe 1 or 2 people, that's kind of a lot. And so they shared their pizza crusts with Stone Soup, and we had a pizza day. Logistically, for us, pizza is a nightmare, but it's one of the things that brings the most people together just to pull it off successfully. And so you have all of these amazing resources coming together in the community. It's really beautiful. It's hard to do, but it's totally worth it just for that. The librarians have been amazing partners in this as well. We are in the library parking lot. Unless the weather is just really awful, then we'll rent a room in the basement of the library. But several weeks ago, I don't remember what we had been cooking, but we ran out of food. And one of the people that has been coming for about a year now is alone in the world, essentially, and dealing with some life-threatening illnesses. Stone Soup is kind of his family. The closest thing that he has in this state to family is the group of people that gather every Saturday. So we had run out of food, and it was close to 2, and the librarian sent someone out who had heard of us through someone else. She came outside and said, "I heard that this is where I can get a meal." And at that point, we had some loaves of bread to give away, but we said, "We'll be here next week. Please come back." This guy goes into his car and he pulls out the sandwich he had been saving for his dinner and the cupcakes that he was going to take home to have for his dinner. And he gave them to her. And he said, I wanted her to know that she's welcome and that she's not alone and she should come back. So, you know, we didn't do anything. It was someone in the community that we were serving, somebody who did not really have extra to share, but what he had, he gave to her because it was more important to him that she feel welcome and want to come back than to have his dinner.
I'm going to break in right there just to say, Gabriel, is there anything that you wanted to say to wrap up? And then I wanted to hand it over to Chuck so that he could share a little bit about Love Inc.
Yeah, that was actually kind of the last story I wanted to share about Stone Soup. So, but we do have a Facebook page called Stone Soup Community. If you search for Stone Soup FDL, you can read tons of stories about us. So, go ahead.
Thanks, Chi. And we can come back with questions later, but I wanted to, Chuck, I'm so glad you were able to jump in. And I don't know, would you be able to take about 10 minutes, if you need a little bit more, to tell us about Love Inc. in your community? Chuck, I don't know, you may have to unmute yourself. Are you, no, you're not muted. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure what to do here, I guess.
Oh,
Let's
there
see.
you go. We can hear you just fine now.
Am I on? You
Yep.
can hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this is all new to me. I didn't know I was going to be sharing anything. So
Oh,
uh,
okay.
I am a board member of what's called Love Inc., Love in the Name of Christ in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. And it's a national affiliate that has about 140 places throughout the country where they have Love Inc. Networks. The only other one in Wisconsin is in Sheboygan. So we're the only other location in Wisconsin that has a Love Inc. affiliate. It stands for Love in the Name of Christ. And we just had an open house this weekend. We were given a church building by a church in the community that was closing its doors. And as a legacy, they wanted to give us the building for our use. And so we've taken possession of that, and which has really put us light years ahead of where we'd ever be otherwise, because we have so much room now. We have a whole church facility with many rooms. We normally would just have a what you call a call center. Now we have much room for expansion. And what we do basically is we don't not open yet. We're going to open in August. We're basically a call center where people in the community that have needs would call in to our number. We would take them through an intake process, get their information, and then refer them to a church for whatever help they needed. We don't do emergent needs. We don't pay rent and give out gas card, things like that. We're a non-emergency type organization. And what we do, we're in it for the long haul. We really don't do anything except refer them back to the church who has a particular ministry that these people may need. So the church is involved, and really our purpose is to mobilize the church to be the hands and feet of Christ, because churches on average are have people who want to do something, they just don't know what to do and don't know where to channel their gifts or passions or whatever. And so we partner with churches. We find out what ministries they have available and we get volunteers from the churches, and then we'll match those particular ministries with the calls that we get. So basically we're sending people to a church to get help. And so it's more than just a temporary thing. It's more than just a handout. It's more like a hand up. So rather than enable them, we empower them. We walk alongside them. We pray with them. We see what other needs they may have. We, of course, invite them to church, invite them to receive Christ. And because we know that at the root of every problem they're facing, no matter what it is basically the broken relationship with God. And so we know that if we can zero in on that, and we're very clear from the outset, we're a Christian ministry. with God as our source and churches as our partners. So God's right in the forefront. So people are coming to us after the 45-minute intake process, which is quite extensive. And in that process, we would ask them, what are you going to contribute? What are you going to do? How have you been helped? And what's your part in the situation you're in? So it gets people maybe for the first time to examine their situations from a different perspective. And there's people sometimes are so used to just being given things, they can have almost a sense of entitlement. And we try to work with that, but yet help them understand that they can work in their own situations. They can um, have a part in their own situation they find themselves in. They can have they're not an innocent bystander. They have a very active part, a role in it. And so it's kind of a different concept. And most churches are engaging in things, like food pantry things, which are great. But this tries to take it a step further and get them involved in the transformation process, rather than just say, give them food, which we will do, the churches will do. They still hand out gas cards, still hand out food, but they also will ask them, what can you do? What can you bring to the table? What can you do to help out here? So we involve them as much as we can and try to, I guess you could say, instill hope within them that they don't have to stay like this forever, that they can maybe move out of this poverty thing that they've gotten themselves into, whatever. So that's kind of a basic, brief story of what we do. And like I said, we'll be up and running probably this August. And so I've been on the board about two and a half years now. So it's been a long process even to come to this place we are right now. And especially the last several months have been given a building, which has really been phenomenal, that we have now a building we can use with parking, with training rooms, with offices, with a call center, with everything that we need to get this up and running. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Fantastic.
But thanks for letting me share.
Well, you did great. We put you on the spot. Sorry about that. Since we're talking about networking and creating partnerships, so acknowledging the realities that sometimes within the church, even if churches maybe have multiple ministries or people with different passions, and you're not going to get everybody on the same page with that, but what does it mean to build networks around that ministry so that it can go out and achieve more, as God's directing that, than any individual church, small or large, would be able to do on its own. I think Love Inc. is kind of naturally, as Marie articulated, churches networking and trusting that people get connected to the appropriate place, that it's not about the competition, but about, kingdom work. Chuck, could you say maybe just a word or two about how is that working within your own context, your own congregation, in terms of how people get connected in your church to that, to Love Inc., or is that, maybe that's a work in progress? We haven't talked about that piece yet.
It's kind of a work in progress. Our church contributes to Love Inc. every month, and we're partnering with, right now we have, I think, about 14, 15 different churches in the community that are partnered with us. To start Love Inc. in any community, you have to have a minimum of 7 different denominations working together. So this is a first for our community to have denominations working together for a common goal. I've been here almost 30 years and I've never seen this happen before. So this is kind of new work, exciting work, but also never been done before. So don't really have something to look back on. But several people in our church have filled out volunteer questionnaires. They are going to be volunteering for Love Inc. They're going to be working at handling the phones or doing the ministry work or whatever. So that's kind of all in a vision state right now, since we're not having our doors open yet. But I have a small church and they are excited about it. They ask about it regularly and we talk about it. And I say that one thing that I realized a long time ago is that churches unfortunately the pews become a landing place for people. And I was thought about that, and I think God would show me that pews should be a launching place. It should be a place where you go out from and do the work of Christ, not a place where you just come in and it's good and well to serve in the church, but sometimes our churches, that's all we're doing is serving within the church body. And we don't often serve outside the body because we really, frankly, don't know what to do. We don't have connections. We need to tell our people, go here for this situation and do this for this amount of time. And everybody's already been screened and background checked, so you're safe. And go take care of this. And when you give them those kind of specifics, they're glad to go do something. But just to kind of say, go out and do the work of Christ, go volunteer, go do something, it just kind of doesn't really register with them. They don't get much traction. They don't know what to do. The only other alternative in town is there's United Way, which you can call and you can be a volunteer and rake leaves and things. But I mean, there's really no other mechanism for the church to be involved in meeting needs. And we have the biggest really volunteer base in the city at our disposal. So why not activate them to meet needs in the community? And what's amazing is not only are you meeting needs, but the real transformation is what happens in the life of the church and the people in the church when their lives are transformed, when they go out and are the hands and feet of Christ. That's what we're looking for. That's what's going to change the church, really, is people seeing how vital their Christianity really is to those in need. And they're going to grow and mature in their spiritual life, and that's really what the end result is.
Okay,
We're going to meet.
Chuck, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to kind of start to bring this back around just so we have
sure. Yeah.
But I think something critical is that telling the stories and those experiences can revitalize, God's presence and action.
I believe that. Yes. Thank you.
So I'd like to open it up to the group, either for stories of your own connection or questions. We've got about 15 minutes. If you've got insights, particularly in how do we start to listen for, or in your experience, identify those points of contact from which you start to launch, or you learn something about the community that can be a nucleus for partnerships, maybe that would be some good wisdom for us too. But would like to open it up at this point to questions and stories.
First, I'd like to thank Chuck, particularly their group, for really expecting something from the people that they help, because that is helping those people. Entitlement it's just kind of born into some of the issues we have today. And asking them what they are going to do makes them want to do something.
Right.
So I really appreciate that. I'm involved, they call me the clothes lady. It is not denominationally. There's no denomination regulation within it whatsoever, but through the neighborhood and through people that I know, whenever they clean their closets, whenever they clean out anything in their home, they know that I collect it. And at any given time, I'm on my way to Emmanuel with a car full. And so that's not really organized, but just making people aware of the fact that there's a place for those things. And I really get very positive feedback from that. And all of these people are from different denominations, and their churches usually collect coats and hats and mittens, but it's just a way of servicing some of the needs that actually another group is really doing the hands-on.
Thanks, Peggy. I know one of the things, I hesitate to speak for Max since he's not here, but at least my memory of one of the things that he has said is he talks about the rule of thirds, that when you start something, try to intentionally plan for only a third of the core group to actually come from within the church, another third from people who are on the fringes, who are maybe marginally connected or somewhat connected to the congregation, that might be the natural next layer or ring of networks. And the other third from the community in which you seek to serve, that they become sometimes the people of peace. They may know the answers to the questions that we don't understand yet, or so that deliberately, in some senses, trying to be deliberate about that, not trying to do it on our own steam, was a wise piece that kind of stuck with me. I don't know that we've strictly applied that in all situations, but it's been helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, the rule of thirds is something that we've also kind of not consciously applied, but has worked in Stone Soup as well. Probably about a third of the regular. Well, the line between volunteer and guest is very fuzzy, very intentionally, and we have people who stand on both sides of that line. But the regular people who cook and schlep stuff across town, volunteers. A third of them about are from our congregation, a third are from other congregations, and about a third are people who we know through people who started just coming because it was a free meal, and have since become very active, or very early on even became very active as volunteers as well. So.
Just to insert here, as both Gabriel and Chuck were sharing, Brian and I were adding some commentary on the chat box of things that we might have heard them say in regards to what are elements of collaboration. Those, at least from my point, are just total interpretations. So if I missummarized, please feel free to connect. But I wanted to point that out in case that might spur some questions or comments from others.
I'm wondering if anybody in the group, whether it's anybody in the group, has had experiences where starting out with a passion or an interest that may not on the surface appear to be a spiritual or a religious, or at least on the surface a traditional kingdom of God seeming piece, but pursuing that and networking and creating community around that has opened up opportunities where you've seen God at work. So there's many ways that we might come around to that, and I'm wondering if there are any stories along that line as well. I think the knitting piece was one that I found interesting with your story, G.
Yeah, there's a couple ways that has kind of, I'm a very passionate knitter. In fact, I kind of have my ball of yarn that I've been working on because I focus better when I'm knitting. But I'm part of a knitting group at the church that has, that hangs out with two knitting groups from Waupun, both church groups, the Pearls of the Church and the Holy Stitches. Brian thinks that we sound like knitting gangs, and our Yarnians. But the Yarnians, it's easier to invite someone to a knitting group, I think, than it is to invite them to Sunday morning worship. And so we have had people come to our knitting group that are not involved with church, and get involved with our mission knitting, which has been hats, scarves, mittens for people in need. But also my relationships with the women in my secular knitting group, I guess. the women I hang out with downtown every Tuesday night, many of them have been knitting together for 20 or 30 years, and know each other very well. But as those relationships have developed, even things that I've just observed and not been a part of, one of the people in the group was dying of cancer, and another woman in the group basically just went and sat with her in hospice and through her chemo appointments. And those of us, not everyone in the group is a person of faith, but some of us are. and would tell us that we were praying for her, and just, you know, how that impacted her life and her mother's after she passed away. But also just, you know, getting them involved with Stone Soup as sort of unofficial collaborative partners, and the ways that they try to find other projects to reach out into the community is really cool. But yeah, I didn't go into it as, you know, I'm going to evangelize my secular knitting group. It was just, I needed something to hang out with non-church people. I needed a context in which to do that, and I love knitting. And so I kind of did it for my own mental health, more or less, and it turned into a ministry.
You know, I'd like to, without putting anybody on the spot, but I would like to say, if Mark, Kurt, Marty, if any of you have, you know, bits of wisdom, experience, if anyone has questions, you know, would like to welcome your input there. I'm holding back because Marty, I know you in particular have stories, but yeah.
Else wants to speak. I just I thought of this most interesting thing when Gabriel was speaking. When I moved to Neenah, and after there, I got an email from a pastor in Sheboygan Falls, and he had met a refugee from Syria and was, and this is my politics, but this Syrian refugee family got in before the current administration. I just want to say that. So one of them was a brilliant artist, and the pastor emailed me some of the photographs of this man's art. And the Syrian refugee wanted to know if there was any artists in Sheboygan that he could be part of. So thankfully, you know, I was an artist in Sheboygan. So I connected my pastor friend from Sheboygan Falls with the artists, and they were able to really form a network with this man. And it's pretty cool that the artists are involved also with their churches, and they're on the refugee assistance committees from their churches. So there's sort of this synergy of art and church and mission with a Muslim, you know, Syrian refugee. So that was cool.
Thank you. Yeah. You never just know what's going to happen, right? So sometimes there's so much of this that is not about what we plan, but simply being available, I think, and looking for what's the Spirit doing and how do we join in on that. Got time for one or two other questions or comments if anybody has a good word for us.
A brief story in response to your question, Brian, and it's still unfolding, and I don't see it necessarily as a development of ministry, but an opportunity to live out my discipleship call in my own community. And the post folks, I spoke about this a little bit last week, but and it wasn't started by me. It was started by a mom at my school who befriended me. I mean, I was sitting at a school event feeling very tired after work, and she started talking to me, and we became friends. And so kind of through that group and through other groups, developing also kind of a group, like Gabriel says, a group for me to hang out with outside of church folk, and be able to just experience life with a different lens. And it happens to be a group that are particularly sensitive to the experience of international families in our suburb, as well as people of color, and opening up opportunities for me to really bring a perspective around racial justice to our suburb. And some of that conversation is more formalized as far as me offering workshops in our school district, but some of it is also informal, of getting people together and just having real open conversations about race and the impact to us as families and to our district. Some of them are Christians, some are not. And so for me, it's an opportunity for me to be stretched in living out what I feel is at the core of my Christian calling. Just living it out as far as sharing, you know, godly values of respecting all persons and valuing all persons, not just personally, but even in our systems, particularly in my case, systems of our education here in our district. So I'm excited about that. I'm trying to just pay attention and be mindful of God's work in the midst of that. So that's something exciting happening in my life.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think we are just about at time. Something I would be interested in, and I imagine would probably be very useful for the commission, is at some point in time, would love your feedback on, you know, maybe just a moment. Was this in general, was it helpful? And, you know, if it's yeah, it's okay. But, you know, we're trying to figure out, is this a helpful format for future conversations on different topics? So, you know, just general thoughts on that, whether now or later would be helpful.
And we'll send out an email to everybody as well with just kind of a few feedback questions. This is the first time that we're doing this. We would like to do it quarterly, but you know, since this is our first time, you guys are the guinea pigs, and we'll we'd like to learn how to do it better, you know, to grow into this a bit.
Gabriel, do you have a contact email for Mark?
I do, yes. Yeah, so I can send that out as well.
Great. Well, gee, that's all I've got. I'll turn it back over to you. And
Okay. Yeah, we have not yet set a date for our next one, but I think we had talked about September, possibly. I don't remember. We'd have to look at my notes, but I believe that our next topic for our web conference is going to be on mental health. So that one is coming up, and I know we have talked about doing one on addiction, particularly the heroin crisis, for churches that are addressing that or seeing that need in their communities. So those are some upcoming topics, and if you know of anyone that you think would be interested in participating in one of these, you know, we encourage you to send out Facebook invites when we get an event put together. So I think that's all
where
that I
that's coming from are the ministry focus spheres, for I forget the terminology, but those are based on the responses that churches have given the region about things that they are actively doing and are involved in. So we're trying to build these off of the sorts of things that churches in the region have indicated an interest in or an active ministry in.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the time to share.